Shirley, and I will be the host at this venue for the day. Before we begin, a few cursory announcements and instructions. Please put your phone on silent so as not to disturb the sessions and our speakers. In your attendee kit, you will find the agenda for all 3 days of Charcha. Please be mindful of the timings and the locations and ensure that you do not miss anything. You may actually approach any of our volunteers who are wearing the Charcha t-shirt to ask where the venue is. They are here to ensure you have a seamless experience. Most importantly, we have a QR code at the back of the agenda. We would really love your feedback. It's very valuable to us. So please take out 5 minutes of your time at the end of the session, scan it, and share the feedback with us. And thank you for being here. We will get started with today's first session. Data management and impact assessment are, of course, two most important elements of success for a social impact organization. Our first panel will delve into this topic, navigating effective data management in the social impact landscape. This is co-hosted by NuSocia, and moderating the session is Dr. Manju Menon, CEO of NuSocia. Joining her on the panel is Dr. Sarayu Natarajan, founder of Apti Institute, Rahul Kulkarni, Chief Technologist at Samagra, and Aditi Namdeo, Director, Strategic Initiatives at JPAL. Invite you all to please come on stage. Over to you, Dr.
Good morning, and once again, a very warm welcome to all of you to Charcha 2024. I hope I'm audible to all of you. A little louder? Okay. So I'm sure those who have been part of the discussion since yesterday have had some fantastic insights coming, and we have another 2 days ahead of us where a lot of interesting sessions are lined up, and I'm sure there's a lot to hear, get inspired, and make meaningful connections. We at NuSocia, we are extremely delighted and honored to co-host this particular topic and bring this session to you on data and impact. And before we start the discussion, I would want to take a couple of minutes to actually share with you why we chose this topic. And in that process, why we have chosen 3 experts who will be sharing their insights and experiences in terms of the topic that we are discussing today. So we at NuSocia, we are an impact advisory firm that works at the intersection of knowledge, research, and practice. And in the last 6+ years of actively working on the ground, we have engaged in projects across more than 22 states, cutting across 14+ SDGs, and have worked with a wide range of organizations across sectors doing evaluations, assessments, landscape studies, process documentation, etc., etc. And in that process, we have dealt with a lot of people and a lot of data, or I would say sometimes the lack of data. Right? So we all understand, so since all of us are part of the sector, we all understand that for providing any actionable insight, that's what our role as an advisor is to our clients. We have to go through stacks of data to understand what has been going, what are the benchmarks which have been established by other organizations, and we often engage ourselves also in the process of primary data collection on the ground and synthesizing them and producing insights for our clients. While doing some of these activities. We have also found certain systemic issues. When I say systemic issues, these are general and common issues, which were found across the length and breadth and across projects that we were part of, and all sizes and shapes of organizations working in different thematic areas. And therefore, I'm sure some of the things that I'm going to share with you are those which all of you can relate to, because you would have at least experienced, if not all, some of it at some point in time, right? So, first and foremost, I think the basic hygiene. So all of us who are from the social impact sector, we understand impact map, right? Something that we have been observing that is the absence of a documented impact map. Impact map always exists. Everybody know why they are working and what they are trying to do, but it is not necessarily documented, which means that it leads to broken indicators and weak indicators and broken MIS, right? So it's not something that we can make sense if we do not have a robust impact map in place. And therefore, a related issue that we have also seen is the project MISs. Actually, we get a lot of MIS when we do evaluations. And we see that a lot of MIS is more focused towards monitoring and less towards indicators which will actually tell you whether we are achieving the results or not. So the focus on monitoring is kind of hijacking everything that we are doing with MIS. Of course, as researchers, we always have this tussle between timeline and data comprehension, which is something that we all have to deal with. The other thing is, and whenever we are using technology for data collection, and especially when we're speaking about the tail end of data collection that happens in projects, we see that there isn't enough adequate training and technical support being provided to the last mile person who collects data. And that often have implications on the quality of data that comes to us in projects. And of course, the question of adequacy of data. How much do we really need to collect, right? That question, I don't think most of us have not been able to answer it yet, but that's an important question to answer probably. And of course, the lack of collaboration among actors when it comes to data collection. We have had several instances where when we were collecting data at district level and block level, and we come across 15 different organizations working with the same set of households and still collecting almost 50% of similar data, and then doing that exercise time and again. And therefore the question of ownership, who owns the data and how much can you share with each other? So that also becomes a pertinent question before us. And of course, a very important issue of governance and protecting respondent identities, because that's core to what all of us need to do, and especially those who are working with CSR donors. There is a balance that we need to keep with accountability of data as well as of the work that we do, and the privacy of the respondents that we are dealing with. So with the DPDP Act and others coming into the picture, these norms are going to be stricter going forward, and how do we really deal with that? And something which is very close to my heart is that something I believe we have not cracked yet is how do we really document tacit knowledge that exists within organizations. I don't think globally we have not been very successful in addressing that issue, and we still as social organizations, there's a lot more that we need to do in terms of transferring knowledge, probably documenting knowledge and then transferring knowledge within and between organizations. So all of these observations, I would say, have kind of motivated us to decide that this could be one of the topics that we can pick up for a convention like this, and probably all of you who are sitting here would find it useful and important. Before I go to my extremely knowledgeable panelists here and asking them to add their value on the topic, I would also like to paint a picture on what I understand about this whole data management landscape. So the way I look at it is, how do we collect data, right? So we see that and it's understood, we collect qualitative data, we collect quantitative data, but we also are well aware that how much are we able to collect observation data, right? How much are we able to use observation as a tool? How much are we able to collect experiential data out there and tacit information? So that becomes the context in which some of these qualitative and quantitative data need to be understood. And sufficiently capturing the context. And context is very important in social, right? So when context changes, how does the interpretation change? So that's something that I'm sure Aditi was going to speak a lot on how we navigate that issue of context when we use data. And once the data collection is done, we look at some of the principles that are non-negotiable when it comes to data in terms of quality, right? How complete, comprehensive is it? Integrity of data, which is in terms of how verifiable, consistent are they? The input and output of data, right? How technically competent are we in doing it? The governance part of data, which is becoming very, very important going forward. And the security, especially the confidentiality and the compliances related to data collection. And finally, I believe that when we, especially as researchers, when we sit down and analyze some of these, and I'm assuming that we're getting a clean data set before us, we still have to integrate that into the context, right? And then comparing it with if a baseline is available, compared with the baseline or with the control group, or with other sets which are benchmarking sets which are available, and going beyond the charts and graphs that we make in terms of making decisions, right? So how do we navigate maybe one step ahead in terms of understanding data better? And in all of these contexts, and these are things that we have always been doing. It's nothing that is new to us, right? We've always done that. But then there is also an evolution or the addition of technology into this space, right? So with technology, the scale of this activity has immensely gone up. There was a time when many of us would have used pen and paper to collect, analyze, and do all of these things. But now things have changed a bit, and with that, and with the new age technologies like the artificial intelligence, how are the complexities emerging, and how do we really navigate it? And as social impact sector, I believe that we cannot be elusive about it. We have to figure out a way of managing this thing, integrating technology to what we are using, and at the same bringing effectiveness and scale to what we do. And therefore, today's discussion, we'll be looking at 3 important topics, right? One is looking at the data and the data use and management and the challenges around it. Not just the challenges, I'm sure the panelists are here who will also be giving you some tips to manage those challenges going forward. Technological solutions, how do you use technology effectively in your work? Overcoming some of the challenges that technology brings with it. And the most important part of privacy and security related issues as we start using more and more data. So before we jump into the discussion, I also want to quickly hear from you. I'm not sure if all of you are able to access your Wi-Fi, your network is connected, but if you are, if I could request you to scan, okay, it's coming out, right? Okay. Scan the code and put in your feedback on the 3 questions that we have for you for there. Yeah. So, were you able to take the scan? If not, you can just log into menti.com and put in the code. The one. Okay. Okay. You can just skip it, right? Take a minute to Are we good? Like, are you able to do it? Yeah. So some responses are coming. So I think I'll request my panelists to look at those responses because probably you will need them to respond adequately to the questions and discussions. So some of the common challenges that you face related to data usage at your work, right? So reliability is coming up as a big factor, and so is the governance. Security is. Analysis, yeah. I can see presenting data, capturing data, lack of clarity, interesting point. Good. Cool. There's another question that comes in, which is, you just flip in, right? Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of concern still around data security and privacy, which is emerging in the room. And so I can see the graph going up with integrity and accuracy as well. Yeah. Great. Good insights, thank you. And yes, it's another important thing. How well informed are you about? Correct. Okay. Right. So and as our host mentioned, there is an extra QR code which will emerge towards the end of the session where you can put in your questions for the panelist. And if in case you're not able to, please feel free to write it down and pass it to some of our volunteers here. We will be happy to take them as well. So I'll probably give because I need to do this, right? I need to give an introduction to the panelists, wonderful panelists that I have here. And all of them have been so kind and so serious about the task that we have taken up for ourselves. So let me introduce Aditi Namdeo from JPAL. Aditi brings with her over 2 decades of extensive experience in the public-private partnership, technology policy, innovation, and consulting across the globe, including Europe, the US, and Australia. She has led leadership positions at organizations like World Economic Forum, Reserve Bank of India, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. And currently the Director of Strategic Initiatives of JPAL. She leads a capacity accelerator network to unlock data use potential for social impact. We have Rahul Kulkarni, the Chief Technologist at Samagra, which is a mission-driven governance firm where he drives population-scale transformation in agriculture, education, skilling, and healthcare using open-source technology. So any questions related to open system, he is a person who will be answering us today, yeah? And he comes with an extensive experience in the technology side with Orkut, Google, and all of that behind him. And now in the social impact space, trying to leverage all that knowledge into the world that we are part of. Thanks, Rahul, for being here. And Dr. Sarayu Natarajan, very unique combination of she's a lawyer, has experience in venture investing, she's an entrepreneur herself, she's a researcher as well. So she's a founder of Apti Institute and will be helpful in understanding the privacy part of the law and understanding the data and ethics and data management of ethical practices and values when you deal with data. So with that, I'll put a pause to my long introduction and welcome Aditi to give. So the way we are going to do the session is slightly different from the other panels. We're going to give all 3 of them sufficient time to give an introduction to some of the topics that they are passionate about speaking with us today. So each of them will speak for 3 to 5 minutes, and then we will join for a discussion in the panel. That's how we have planned it. So can I welcome Aditi to, come and give her opening remarks.
Hi, thanks for that kind introduction, and it's great to see some familiar faces, some of you whom we met yesterday. It's definitely a hot topic of interest. Data and AI are the buzzwords as we are seeing. At least the past 5 years to a decade has been all about data, and now very much about AI. And many a times these terminologies are mixed quite a bit. I would like to start by how very quickly Manju actually attributed labels to our data. She said we are experts. So I'm going to lose those labels and tell you that we are users of data, experiencing data use in our work. And I come from JPAL, where we do a lot of research evaluations, impact evaluations of data. And through the impact evaluations of the program, we deal with a lot of government data. We also deal with a lot of social impact organizations and NGO data to be able to unlock insights and to be able to cull out what works and what does not. So with that, okay, so we have another mentee. We don't want to overuse it, but I'll keep this very quick. How many of you, fairly simple one, what is administrative data? How many of you know what is administrative data? And could you just give me a few responses? We'll be quick on this one. Can somebody help me with the...
Once this can switch to that.
Yeah. Aha, no responses. Okay. Logistics, number of people, climatic conditions, administration usage, scheme usage, that's a nice one, yeah. Coverage data. Number of beneficiaries, very important. Financial, very important. Great. Can I switch? Health. Yeah. Thank you. So, very simply put, administrative data is operational data, right? Anything which gives you operational information, transactional information, anything which is, as you said, about beneficiaries, about the scheme usage, about satellite data, about anything which is service oriented. So all of that is admin data. And why is this important? Because all of us use admin data, whether we don't call it or so, but we have been using admin data a lot in probably your respective organizations to cull out insights, to use it, to interplex it with other non-traditional data sets and sources to be able to come up with insights. So information collected, used, and stored primarily for operational purposes is what is called as admin data, right? Now, we've seen data gone through a lot of evolution. You see the first picture, it's a traditional government file house picture with reams and reams of paper, to government realizing how data has to be evolved to be more digitally available. And then there were initiatives by eGov, data.gov.in, open data sets, to now more modern ways of getting data, which is through satellite maps, through imagery, data visualization. So on the far right, you see some of the data which we actually were using to look at how a certain incentive has to be distributed to a certain urban household coverage in Tamil Nadu. And we were perplexed because some of what you said, what are the challenges that you face with data? Digital data also has a lot of challenges because of accuracy, because of reliability, variability. And so when we were studying this scheme, we found that a lot of the address sources were coming from different data sets, and there were some houses which were in the middle of the sea. They were not even on the land. And so we had to work to actually just skim 30-40% of the usable data to be able to say, okay, which are the beneficiaries who should get whatever that incentive is supposed to go to them through the government. So all I'm trying to tell you through this is that even though there's an evolution of data from paper to paperless, there are still challenges with what you see in the data and deal with it. And so this is a study. I'm not sure if you can see all the gray matter very nicely, but our JPAL affiliated researchers, Senthil Muralidharan and others, during the time of COVID used cell phone data to understand what was the footfall of people and citizens in different places in business districts, whether they were going to a McDonald's or a Starbucks or a gym, and what were the incidents of using that data. They were able to interrelate it to the incidence of you catching COVID faster. And so, the study is very much available for you to look at. It's a public study. Is it safer to visit a coffee shop or a gym during the time of COVID? And how much of the incidence of the COVID infection would you likely catch if you were going to a cafe versus a fine dine versus a gym? And so it came out with the interpretation that going for a jog in an open space was much safer. But all I'm trying to tell you is that COVID, actually, the pandemic really brought data in our faces, right? Like people were studying data left, right, and center to be able to draw conclusions and interpretations which will help them fight the pandemic better. And we were all talking about data even when we were not realizing it. And so this is what we really do at JPAL, right? We are a bunch of researchers. We were started by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. For those who are uninitiated and do not know about JPAL, very 30 seconds micro view. And we are an affiliated researcher network across globally. We are 200 odd researchers, around 70, 80 odd universities. We've done 2,000 evaluations. And what we do is really baked into the crux of data and data insights. So we use data to be able to do the research that we do. And that research produces the evidence that we use to inform the policymakers. And so the second vertical that we work is policy outreach. We synthesize this data to be able to make it into meaningful information for the policymakers to understand what policies and programs will work. And then we also realize that all of this will require people to understand how to work with data. So we also do capacity building. And so in midst of all of this, the important thing is that we've been dealing with admin data and other forms of data for about 2 decades of our existence till today. And so, as I was saying, related to what we have seen, the change in data, we've seen that there is tremendous growth in data generation through the pandemic and through a lot of incidents that we've gone through in the past years, but very limited growth in using that data to call out for decisions. So as very rightly Manju had put up the Menti, you talked about data reliability and usability. So whether it's at the data collection stage or the data storage stage, there are issues on variability, consistency, timeliness, accuracy. And then how are you able to join these dots to be able to call out insights which are important at the phase of data analysis? So what you then transform the data has been collected to some sort of indicators, benchmark those indicators, and to be able to tell you, okay, I've analyzed this data and this is useful and this is not. To be able to then use that data for evidence and decision making and multiplexing it with technology and innovative measures, which I'm sure Rahul will talk about, to see, okay, how is this then insight converted into wisdom, which can help me predict, which can help me plan, which can help me monitor better, right? And so we've been using this methodology, and what we feel is that at JPAL our stance is that data is fit for purpose, and it's not one shoe fit all kind of a thing, right? Like you have to analyze data through the life cycle of data usage. And so whether it is understanding the policy in the context, and some of you came and spoke yesterday, what is the data to be analyzed, what is the data to be interpreted, and therefore what is the data that you need to measure and monitor, depends on what is the usage that you want to use it for. whether you are trying to understand a policy and a context. And so we do a lot of the programs, some of our evaluations are really related to review of programs, which are just related to understanding whether the policy is working or not, or diagnostic analysis through data use cases and capabilities. So actually, are you trying to analyze what is working and what is not working? To making it more efficient, so whether you're trying to make it innovative, and then trying to scale it up. Once you have understood, okay, this works, and now I want to scale it up. Now, each of these various stages, we have compendium of case studies where we've worked on each of these stages with the government on different case studies. But what I'm trying to say is each of them defines what is the data that you want to use, what is the data that you want to analyze, and what is the data you want to visualize, interpret, and therefore scale. And so each of these cycles require different sort of data sieving or data interpretation. And so to be able to cull out meaningful use of reliable data in the data decision lifecycle, we've been using our research capabilities to be able to interplex with the local context. So whether it is integrating data quality best practices at the time of data collection, or defining what are the good practices to protocols for secure data sharing, metadata documentation. All of this is something that we'll talk about later in our discussion. To data analysis, as I mentioned before, identifying what are the indicators that you want to calibrate for data usage and data monitoring. And then what of those indicators are meaningful for you to capture, and then visualizing them and analyzing them. And the last box really looking at how do you then multiplex admin data, survey data with non-traditional data sources, whether it's satellite data, whether it's geospatial data, whether it is data that you're getting from the phone records or SMS data. And many a times we have seen that some of the programs that we have evaluated have come through multiplexing traditional data with non-traditional data sources. So for example, if we were studying nutrition for women, we found that sometimes incentivizing them on their sanitation habits has actually led to a larger outcome on the nutrition of women. And so multiplexing nutrition data with the sanitation data has been able to give us insights that traditionally were not available through a naked eye on traditional data sets. So that is where these days a lot of evidence and decision making and data insight culling is happening. A lot of modern data work is happening in this box, the third box. And so just concluding some of this, because I'll speak about some of these evaluation studies. For a cohesive data strategy to come up in your organization, we need to look at projects or programs that attempt the use of data to diagnose, test, and target. And some of these come through research collaborations where we break the data silos by combining multiple sources of data, as I just said. And some of the examples that I can tell you on this is just one example to leave you with, because I'm going a bit over time, is this. There is a phone-based high-frequency monitoring in Telangana for a scheme that we did, which is called as Raitu Bandhu, where the government was giving some very small amount of cash, around 4,000, 5,000, to farmers directly. And what we realized is that there was a little bit of a downfall in terms or the frauds in terms of representing whether this is being distributed very uniformly or not. And so we actually worked with the government to actually put high frequency checks, and we trained the data officers to conduct these high frequency checks, which was 50% of the people were told that we will investigate directly with the farmers whether they have received that 4,000 rupees or not. And the farmer extension workers were also made aware of this monitoring that we will be doing. Only 50% of them knew about it, 50% did not. And so we worked on through high frequency checks to find out whether people are actually receiving that cash incentive or not. And this was done on a very, very high weekly basis. So it's a high frequency check that you do. It's a very simple method, but it helped us actually prove that the data that was being collected and reported from the field was actually not fraudulent and did not have gaps, and people received what they were meant to receive. So the example of this is important in the context of of the first point that I said, that you need to test some of the programs and projects to be understanding what is the data that you want to monitor and why. And so at each stage of those life cycle that I spoke about, we have evaluation studies that I'll be discussing through this. So say, what could be the different processes, measures, or technology practices that you can think of to be able to get the outcome that you intend to. This is another study, but I'll discuss this later. This is an immunization study that we undertook in Haryana between 2016 to 2018. And again, looking at multiplexing 2 forms of data sets. I'll be covering this later. Coming to the whole point on working through the life cycle, there are certain resources that we have culled out, and because some of you have requested to get some of these resources, a main part of data work is around the 4 stages, which is data collection, data analysis, data visualization, and then data dissemination. And so we have some administrative toolkit, data toolkit that we've created with Niti and the Demio. And there are case-based evaluations that you can look at. And then there is a handbook on using administrative data for research and evidence-based policy. All of them are very useful resources and actually open out a lot of best practices, processes, a lot of things that you mentioned that you wanted to learn about. Another point on how to evaluate your programs, little later this year in December, there is a program which we'll be opening up to all the social impact organizations called as Evaluating Social Programs. This is going to happen in Bangalore. This is the scan code. You will get to know more about it once you look at this program, but which is exactly what are the programs, what demonstrate the projects and the programs to evaluate them to understand what data you need to monitor and why. And then the second point, which is on the data strategy, is actually building your capacity, creating and strengthening data function and capacity. And as part of this initiative, something that we do at JPAL is the India Data Climate Health Accelerator, which I lead, where we're working with the universities, 3 chosen universities, Ashoka, BITS Pilani, and IIITD, to customize a course on data science for social impact, where we've been training about 200 to 250 odd students. And we've been conceiving projects with social impact organizations where 50 of these people are being placed to work in high data-driven projects. Some of you are sitting in the audience, and I'm really happy that that you're here, Rakhi, Mayank from Civic Data Lab, and others. And so we're working on this fellowship program where we are actually looking at how do we bring open research data sets that the research community can then collaborate and work on mitigating climate change on human health problems. Again, just an example of one of this, I'm done. This is my last slide. One example of this initiative, we are working with Art Park, where we are looking at dengue prediction model. And so dengue, amongst all other non-communicable diseases, is one where data is actually collected by the government and also stored and looked into for prediction needs. So our fellows working at Art Park has been able to look at the social impact organizations' ways of structuring the data, working with data. So a lot of this has been standardized in form of creating data catalogs, data pipelines, and data standards, all of which we can discuss as we go into the panel. So leaving you with this example to say that a lot of what you want to study depends on what you want to solve for. And what you want to solve for will tell you what you want to measure. And so that's the cycle of data that I want to leave you with the last slide. Thank you so much. Sorry I took so much time. Okay, calling now my co-panelist Rahul for enlightening us with the technology part of the data.
Thank you, Aditi. All right, a very good morning to all of you. At Samagra, we are a mission-driven governance firm, right? So we really want to figure out how do you solve problems at a state level, at a national level, working backwards from the impact at population scale. Technology is a means to do that. Data is a means to do that. It's not the only reason to do what we do. And so in doing that, what I want to give you in a short time is a perspective on the kind of problem statements that you hit. And I'll just take an example and I'll leave you with problem statements. I won't explain the solutions, but I'll leave you with certain problem statements on how, take an example of a state, beautiful state, rich in agricultural heritage, Odisha. And in Odisha, we've been working for many years, and I want to give you a perspective of how a state goes from being data poor to data rich, and what is the impact that has on the actual livelihood. And so if you think about this, when we started in Odisha, the first problem was when you take list of districts. Anyone know how many districts Odisha has? 30. Now, out of those 30 districts, when we started our engagement there, we did a pivot table on list of districts. And guess how many districts we got? 32, 34. Why? Because there were spelling mistakes, or variants of spellings. So they're all correct spellings. But local dialect demands the spellings are written differently. And therefore, you can't just do a pivot table on data. You can't do data mining on data. It doesn't matter how fancy a database you use. And so starting from that point in time, it involves standardization. It involves understanding the end user. So that's another big perspective that we bring to at Samagra, which is understanding the end user. If we are not able to actually benefit that end user, right? And so imagine this is not your fancy end user walking around with a cell phone. They are busy, they're hard-working individuals. Also, you may notice this is not a great landlord who's monitoring a large expanse of field, right? And so if you think of loan waivers, or if you think of any of these incentives given to farmers, how do you define farmers? That is the first question that we had in Odisha. So when you think of subsidies and disbursements, who is a farmer? Is this lady not a farmer? She doesn't own land. She does not actually have money in the bank account. She may not have a bank account. But is she not a farmer? She's as much a farmer as any one of those other farmers owning land, right? And so how do you identify these farmers out of the whole thing? So can you figure out of the database, out of their buying patterns, out of any point that the government has interacted with these citizens, these residents, who are the real farmers? And so when it came down to actually figuring out how do subsidies actually get disbursed, how do schemes reach the last mile, there was a lot of data analytics that went behind the scenes to figure out who should get that right money, how should that data be collated, and so on. And so I remember the first meeting that we did at the district office, right? When we showed this at a district split, so we said, you know what, this is the performance and this is the effect of that data. And these districts are not performing well and these districts are performing well. Sometimes all that matters is the leaderboard coming from gaming. So you say these are top 5 districts performing well and bottom 5 districts performing well. The bottom 5 districts performing well took it very sportingly. They said, you know what, yes, I'm not doing well. But you know what, whatever you're showing here at a district level, can you give me the same thing for my district at a block level? And then we started doing reviews and monitoring at a block level. Then when we went there, the block level guys said, you know what, it's fantastic what you've done and gotten to me now. I know I need to improve. Can you give me a split by a village level, by a gram panchayat level, and so on, so forth, right? And so that's how data got granular by demand from people working in the state, not by enforcing some data standard or data collection exercise on them. Then the other part is, how do you actually benefit the end user? This is governance going in overdrive, right? Governance actually happening in an efficient way. But now what happens to the end user? Now you realize that you have a lot of data. They have a lot of data. The data belongs to them. How do you use principles of consent? How do you use principles of democratizing discovery by protocols like Beacon to be able to make credit accessible to them? So how do you actually give them credit so that they can sow the right seeds and get the right fertilizers to have a good crop? So getting into that changed lives for so many individuals, so many crores and crores of rupees disbursed through pure data magic. Then you realize the challenge where things break, right? Agriculture is not easy, there are challenges. So when pest attacks started coming in, then what do? You need real-time advisories. And when you toss an advisory at a state level, they're pretty useless because in a specific district, in a specific gram panchayat, there's only one particular pest that's hitting you. You don't want a long laundry list of pests ki yaar inse bacho, inse bhago. That's not very useful. And so how do you personalize advisories with data to say for you, because you planted this crop and this pest is going to be near you, you need to do X and Y and Z to protect your crop. These are things that are all, again, a magic of data. We reduce pest attacks by about 90% by actually having very personalized advisories on the field. And then you realize that, look, tech can only reach a certain section of the population. the last mile, there's village agricultural workers in most states, and these village agricultural workers actually talk to the farmers on the ground. Then you realize there are only about 3,000 extension workers. Now, how many gram panchayats do we have? We have 6,700 gram panchayats, and it takes a day to reach a farm sometimes. You have to trudge along hilly terrain and get there in swamps and so on. How do you make sure the distribution of village agricultural workers, these extension workers, is very evenly distributed across the state, such that they can reach maximum number of farms in a short time that they have? It is a simple optimization problem. If you go back to operations research, this is not AI, this is not fancy stuff, right? This is old school, 50, 100-year-old mathematics that has already been invented. Use simple optimization to reorganize things in a better way. And that gave magic, because now farmers were starting to say, you know what, I actually met my extension worker. He was able to actually attend to my needs. Then you realize these extension workers also need advice. You know, they are not updated on what is the latest pricing, what is the latest fertilizer, what are the latest things that they should be availing of from a subsidy point of view. Then giving them a supercharging, how do you turn them into superheroes? How are they able to service 20 farmers instead of 3 farmers? And so what is that Iron Man suit, if you will, for those extension workers going out in the field? And that's where AI came in. We started doing experiments with AI as soon as GPT launched about, a year and a half, 2 years ago. And since then, we've been perfecting what does it mean to actually be useful as a co-pilot to these extension workers. And we went from what was, and getting feedback is very, very important, no matter whom you're doing this with. So getting feedback from extension workers, initially they used to only give about 18% thumbs up on our answers, the AI bot used to give, and it would look perfect, but, they were not satisfied. There were a lot of nuances in there in terms of dialects, in terms of understanding, local understanding, and so on. That over a period of 1 year took 1 year to get from that 18% to 90%. Today gives a thumbs up saying, yes, this is the perfect answer I was looking for. And so it is a journey, it is a lot of patience, it is a lot of end user understanding, it's being open to feedback, and it takes time. So with that, we'll dive into the underlying technologies and different aspect of it in the little time that we have for the panel. But wanted to give you this flavor, a spectrum of simple math, simple data to complex AI. It all finally has the underlying same principle at the end for the same intent. Thank you. I'd like to invite Sarayu now to give you a perspective.
Is it okay if I close this? Leave it like that? Okay, cool. Thank you very much. My name is Sarayu. It's a hard act to follow Aditi and Rahul, but I'll try my best. I keep it here on top of this? Okay, perfect. You can hear me, I'm assuming. Yeah. So I'm Sarayu. I run Apti Institute, and we are an organization that works on questions of equity and justice at the intersection of technology and society. So our interaction with data comes in 2 ways. One is we interact with data as thinkers and people who think about how to govern, how to use, how questions of justice and equity are manifested in data sets, data collection practices, etc. We also use data as researchers. So when we do empirical work, going out into the field, there's a good amount of work that we do in terms of collecting, analyzing, and then keeping and reporting on such data. So it's coming from these 2 perspectives that I speak. I hope to cover 2 things, and I will try my best. Fortunately or unfortunately, I can't see the time thing, but I'll try to keep to time. I want to talk about 2 things. One is to think a little bit more about what kinds of data there are available and how to make best use of them in social projects. And second, talk a little bit about the concerns of privacy and security, which seem to be fairly significant to the group in the room. The first is, before jumping into thinking about the utility of data itself, the one thing I want to emphasize is that data is not this bland, identity-less, politics-less thing that comes up. Indeed, data has very significant relationships to the context in which it is collected, to even the questions that you ask, and what can be measured or what can be assessed. So the idea that data is neutral is not really true. But even having said that, to just give you an example, way back in my PhD days, which is now very many years ago, I was doing fieldwork. And one of the most accepted strategies in PhD fieldwork, particularly in political science, is to use electoral lists, which are, one would imagine, an accurate representation of the people in a constituency eligible to vote. So I said, okay, let me use this. And as I go out into the field, I had to interview a gentleman called SLV Neelakantappa. And I searched and I searched. I searched all the houses around. I asked everybody, but this is a mysterious gentleman who did not exist. And when thinking back about what I learned about politics in the field and the quotidian aspects of politics, it was that very often political parties, for their own gain, create names. And this might have been one such instance, not to sort of throw canards, but this might have been one such instance. So the idea that something is actually representative of a truth on the ground may not always be the case. So that's the sort of fundamental precept or thing to think about in the case of data. So thinking about what is being measured, why it's being measured, and even what is measurable is valuable. Data itself, both Rahul and Aditi spoke extensively about data and data that is in categories, but there's a whole other type of data, and I think Manju alluded to it, which is qualitative data, from which researchers say you can make idiographic analyses or whatever else. This data is very significant and is often very rich. It is thick. It is a dense description of the society it is from, and can often be very instructive in multiple ways. So I'll give you an example of the work that we did, which was with an organization called Video Volunteers, which is based in Goa and has operations, I want to say, in 3 or 4 states, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, and I could be getting this wrong, but are operating in 3 or 4 states. And their primary mode of work is to have community reporters or community activists go out, find issues, civic issues typically, and report on them, and then conduct some kind of campaign of change. So there's a broken hand pump, and they would do a video about it, go try and get it fixed, and then do a success video after it. And over the years, I think they've been in operation about more than a decade now, they have a bank of thousands of videos. So what we did as Apti Institute was to look at these videos, which are about between 30 seconds to 3 or 4 minutes long. We analyzed a small sample of the large thousands of videos that we saw, and we were able to glean 2 very interesting categories of insight. One category of insight is, where do problems occur? So to Rahul's point, what are the specific problems that occur in this block in Bihar? Is there a persistent hand? And then you were also able to infer systematic patterns. For example, in the state of Bihar, is there a pattern with hand pumps breaking down? So you can think of action at a different level. So you're able to glean that kind of information, which is very specific, very targeted, and very contextual, and you can fit into categories. But what we were also able to do was glean insight about narrative strategy, which is that why do volunteers, when talking about a hand pump, talk differently than when they're talking about misogyny, right? Why do they bring up certain instances? So when they're talking about, let's say, the absence of toilets in schools, they're talking very differently than when they're talking about garbage. And so this narrative strategy is also linked, we learned, to efficacy. Now again, before the quant causal people jump on me, it is a very small sample, so I will hold back on that. But having said that, here is very, very rich insight that can drive the success of social projects. So thinking about qualitative data, and particularly now where there is sort of an explosion in generation of qualitative data in the form of content, this can be very insightful, both in terms of determining the frequency of intervention, the type of intervention, as well as the ways in which the intervention can be targeted to drive towards success. I have another example about building agency on data, and perhaps I'll bring that up a little later, but jumping to safety and security. So you have all of this. How do you think about safety and security and questions of privacy? I have a very simple categorization in terms of thinking about this question. One is, of course, what the law mandates. and that is both domestic law, and sometimes when you're processing data that is international, you might be subject to laws that are operational in another jurisdiction. So those are the two big categories, and legal requirements usually come from these sources. They might also come from sectoral laws, the application of which is very context specific and so needs to be thought about. But in the Indian context, the primary one, the biggie, so to speak, is the DPDP, the Digital Data Protection, DPDP, Digital Personal Data Protection Act. And it puts in place principles, and I'm happy to talk about them as we go forward, but it puts in place principles with respect to collection, consent. It doesn't do as much about harm, but that's the primary legislation. For those that are concerned about serving the EU in any manner, there's of course the GDPR as well that kicks into force. There are some commonalities between the two. Both of these laws put in place principles or standards with respect to collection, with respect to processing, with respect to use. And one part of it is knowing what these laws say, but if there are any philanthropies in the room or people who are able to think about this at a structural level, creating public resources and goods about what compliance means with these laws is significantly helpful. The second part of it, which is a little bit more value-based, is the question of how do you use the data, and I'm happy to hold that back just in the interest of time, but look forward to the rest of the discussion as well. Over to you, Manju.
So the good part is that they have almost exhausted all the questions that I had for them. So I'll cut down on my questions, and hopefully we have the QR code coming to take the audience question as well. But I have 3 questions that I want to jump into quickly. One to Rahul, there's a lot of discussion around open source technologies, and especially when we speak about in the social impact sector, a cost of technology becomes a big deterrent for organizations to adopt technology and use technology, and therefore the use of open source technology. So could you speak a little bit about the power of open source technologies, and especially how do we as social sector organizations use them? And also, what are some of the precautions that we need to take into consideration while using some of them, looking at the security part of it a bit? So if you can just...
Sure. No, thanks for that. So you have open source, it's in a spectrum, I would say, in terms of if you're an NGO, you're using technology. You initially used to do custom built software. So everyone starts with custom built software. Then you realize that, a lot of the software has been built already. So if you are doing data, then Open Data Kit, right, is used by 10 million NGOs across the world. Why wouldn't you be one that uses it? And so there are a whole bunch of things that you could directly start using. 70-80% of the work is done. Never assume it's 100%, right? There's always 20% of customization, adaptation to what you need to do. So I think that is one word of caution. You don't expect open source to just solve your problem out of the box. There's always 10 to 20% customization, productization, adaptation yourself to the software that needs to happen. And then there are a lot of digital public goods that have been built based on open source, and those have been hosted by the governments across the globe, and largely so in India, which provide digital public infrastructure for NGOs and others to use it. So for example, if you're in financial inclusion, you've probably used account aggregator framework very heavily. And so account aggregator framework is a way in which you get consented access to a user's data about financial profile that they have. Right? Now, that is a public infrastructure that the government has provided. Just like for identity, there's Aadhaar, there is payments, there's UPI. So a lot of this work is already done. So there are these modes where you can use open source through the government hosted infrastructure already that provides 50% of what you need to do. Then there is the software that you can self-host or get it hosted by some provider where you have open source software and then adapt it to whatever you need. I think those are some elements. And in terms of being careful, I would say open source software is public, it's transparent, it's out there. And what that means is there are so many researchers and students and professionals looking at it. Generally, it is of better quality than regular software. It is about how you actually deploy it. Generally challenges on security and all are deployment related things where somebody takes some software and put it. Based software is generally good. It's about the deployment that you need to watch out for.
That's fine. Thanks, Rahul, for that. And a related question to you, Aditi, that so one of the challenges that we find in the sector is in terms of the capacity to use technology. And you've been doing some work around that. So could you tell us how do we actually build that or bridge that piece of building more capacities within people to use some of these interfaces which are already available, and what are some of the your observations on that?
Sure. Am I audible? Yeah, okay, great, thanks. No, so I think this is one of the most important piece when we are talking about usage of digital technology and new technologies to work with data. And while we have all lived to work with Excel and a lot of base data collection, a lot of analysis happens through Excel. Now there are different forms at data collection stage, which is the first stage of dealing with data, which is, either it's Google Forms or it's elaborated form of survey CTO, which the frontline workers, survey CTO is one such tool which is used by the frontline workers to capture data correctly. So a lot of these investments can go towards training your frontline workers. What get collected best gets measured best. And I think the investments really on the capacity side, more from the government and social impact organizations who are dealing with both primary and secondary data, can be towards the data collection and data reliability phases, because that will actually put a lot of your life cycle stages of data interpretation, analysis, visualization right. And we do know, and yesterday, as I said, some of you are part of the partner network that we've created through the India Data Capacity Accelerator, whether that's Vishal also, who's coming from Waste Warriors, and we were discussing this, right? Like that the training of the staff to deal with some of these new technologies, that's the issue, right? It takes time, it takes patience, and it also takes some amount of investments. But the investments on the upstream will give you a lot of benefits downstream. So if you were to choose between technologies that you can employ and investments that you can do to build capacity, please build that capacity in the upstream activities, which is data collection and data storage issues. As far as this initiative is going on, we do realize that data science capabilities are far lacking in the non-profit sector as opposed to the for-profit sector. And so through this initiative, we've been trying to actually impart data science training to a lot of diversified contingent who are coming specifically from the social sector space, and giving them the fundamentals of working with data science and putting them into projects which will challenge them to work with intersectionality of data between climate, health, develop the science of correlation, causation. How's correlation different from causation? Very, very simple, fundamental concepts. And once they start getting clear, a lot of advanced training of this talent can go in. So I'm keeping the answer short in the interest of time.
Yes, but that's a very interesting point, that how do we actually strengthen the upstream of data, the whole life cycle of data, so that the end use can be more powerful. Over to you, Sarayu. The point that you wanting to mention in terms of the values to use data, the values when you are dealing with and designing for data, could you speak a little bit about that? Because that's a fundamental to the privacy issues that we are speaking about. And
I'll try my best to be short and happy to continue the conversation offline. Like I said, there are two parameters. One is, of course, what you're legally obliged to do. And the primary one to think about in the context of India is the DPDP Act, which mandates certain rules with respect to collection of consent. So it has to be individual, atomized, and context-based. And then use. So each time you use the data that you have collected, that is personal and identifiable to the individual, you will have to seek consent each time, and there are, of course, a few exceptions within the law. The other significant thing, of course, and this tussles with domains of ethics, is that very many projects, actually the vast majority of data can be used to draw all kinds of inferences. In the example of my elections, the same data that showed somebody who is voting in a constituency can also be used to draw inferences about what is the composition of the community and think about what kind of purpose that might be put to. The thing to think about, of course, is lawful purpose, but principles that might mitigate more ethical concerns that do not necessarily fall strictly within the remit of law are principles like purpose limitation, which is that you use the data for the purpose that it is collected for. Data minimization, do I really need this data? And both of these principles working in conjunction with each other can actually be significant. Of course, there's a whole lot more in terms of the specifics, but again, I'd just like to end with some of these capacities are reasonably formulaic and processual, and entities, organizations that are interested in this would do well to invest in both creating or embedding some of these values in the technology itself. So privacy by design as an idea, for example, as well as creating common capacities that civic organizations can use. So that's what I'll end with.
Thanks. I'm rushing all of them through this discussion, but please catch hold of them, all three of them, if you want to know more. I think some of them are going to be on more panels this today, but they're very, very experienced and have deep knowledge about all the topics that they've just probably touched the tip of the iceberg, I would say, today. With that, thank you for having a patient listening to this conversation. This is just a beginning, and we'll have more conversations around it, and we'll be happy to have you all being part of it. I can't thank them enough, and there's no words to thank them, but thanks much for taking all the pain dealing with me on this thing, and a lovely gathering, and happy to meet you all here. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Really, really insightful. And I know this is a topic that we can continue talking on for a very long time. So yeah, like Dr. Menon said, it was just touching the tip of the iceberg, but really appreciate all of you taking out the time and going into the depth. We have a small token of appreciation, so please stick around for that. And for the audience, request you all to please scan the QR code, which is at the back of your agendas, to share your feedback. We would really like your feedback on the session. We will break for 10 minutes, 7 minutes, and start the next session on time.